requires that every school district create explicit policies and guidelines and protocols to help teachers and educators understand how intolerance for difference may arise, how to intervene effectively to help kids learn how to talk about what difference means.
Look, no matter where you are in the political spectrum, left, right, conservative, liberal, everyone agrees that our immigration system is broken.
I mean, it makes me feel unsafe. I thought they was here to protect us. You have to look out for them as well. It's kind of weird walking around, gotta look both ways for the cops and for enemies.
We have significant challenges in New York City based on policing practices both on the streets and in the schools.
It came to the point where I even got jumped by like 10 people. It was during recess. They started chasing me. It was like 5 boys, 6 boys, and then like 4 girls. I think it was because I've always been really tall or like heavy set, I guess. I would cry to my mom all the time. She would come to school constantly, and it got to the point where she wanted something done, but the principal didn't feel like it was a big, serious issue. It did affect me a lot. You'll go around trying to fix yourself, or feeling like you need to fix yourself because everyone thinks there's something wrong with you.
The Dignity for All Students Act is meant to address harassment and bullying undertaken by anyone against anyone. It specifically identifies certain protected classes, certain folks who may be the target of or the victim of harassment or bullying based on, for example, race or gender or nationality. It's not another effort, which we know does not work, to impose a heavy-handed kind of policing model, meaning suspension or detention for acts that may be incivil or provocative, but to really give ways to think about and intervene effectively to prevent harassment and bullying from happening. The bill does a number of things. It requires that every school district create explicit policies and guidelines and protocols to help teachers and educators understand how intolerance and intolerance for difference may arise, how to intervene effectively to help kids learn how to talk about what difference means, how to teach and counsel, how to intervene as mediators to resolve disputes in a productive way. All of those are now the mandate for local school boards to undertake, with the support of the State Department of Education, which is also intended to provide model policies and financial support to implement these new teaching protocols.
If I had to sum up my childhood, it would be bullying ever since I came to America. You know, people would always come and tease me about how I look. They took off my scarf, they ripped it off several times. That wasn't as big as a deal. When they took it off, I put it back on. What was a bigger deal was just, you know, the names, you know, especially if you don't have confidence, that kind of stuff hurts you most. I was always like living in, trying to protect myself. I generally felt like I had no friends. I didn't like school. I always felt like everybody was against me.
One of the things we advocated for with the governor and his council is that it's not sufficient simply to create the statute. That as important as it is, you need to start thinking about how the Dignity for All Students Act gets implemented. And we urged the governor and his council to think about creating a working group. This is a bill that must be and is sensitive to the tension between First Amendment rights of speech and expression and that type of expression and conduct that crosses the line and turns into bullying and harassment that actually disrupts a student's right to obtain an education.
It kind of started when I was in like kindergarten, and it really continued up until like around senior year of middle school. I always used to get teased, mainly because they said like I smelled or, you know, like I was fat and I was dumb. Being bullied for so long made me really think something's wrong with me. I remember sitting on my couch and like just crying because I figured so many people can't like be wrong. A lot of my teachers I would tell, and like they would handle it for the moment, but they never cured the problem all the way. The physical bullying, you know, you get hit, swell up, you know, get a scar, that heals at the time. The emotional bullying is what I still suffer from today. There was a period of about 2 years where my grades really suffered bad, like borderline failing every marking period because the bullying was just so bad. Anybody can get bullied. Black person, white person, Asians, people who were unique in some way will get bullied.
This is really meant to do the really important hard work, which is getting folks and kids and educators into a dialogue about tension, difference of opinion, confusion about difference in a way that diminishes tension, that opens up a framework for discussion that's positive and productive and accepting.
Despite the three amigos and all the dysfunction in Albany, our legislature accomplished so much. Rockefeller drug law reform, the Census Readjustment Act, which eliminated the phenomenon of phantom voters from prison who couldn't vote being counted in the district where they were in prison but not in their home district. The Dignity for All Students Act, anti-bullying legislation that provides for training and support for school districts, requires them to have anti-bullying policies in place. The legislature passed and the governor signed against vehement opposition from Commissioner Kelly, a bill that prohibits the police department from keeping personally identifiable information in a police database of the millions of innocent New Yorkers, primarily blacks and Latinos, who were stopped and frisked and questioned by the police department and never charged with anything. We got the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights, the wage theft bill that protects people from who are denied payment for the hours worked and their overtime, primarily aimed at protecting immigrants who are most vulnerable to that kind of abuse. And the Family Health Care Decision-Making Act. My God, this was like two decades in process from beginning to end. 2 decades worth of advocacy by the NYCLU and many, many others, so that finally, if a loved one is incapacitated and needs medical care, family members can make the decision without having to go to court to prove with a preponderance of the evidence that they would have wanted such and such. There's a lot of big stuff that was done in Albany despite the dysfunction.
We're in Battery Park today, a short walk away from the point where ferries depart to take you to the Statue of Liberty and to Ellis Island. They serve as a daily reminder of the history that immigration has played in our country. Ellis Island historically marks a point in our history where immigrants came in large numbers to the United States. Right next door, the Statue of Liberty represents why they came, a statue that looks out to the rest of the world and symbolizes freedom and the fact that here there's hope for something better.
We're here in the heart of the financial district, not only for New York City, but for the United States and really for the world. New York City has a long history of welcoming immigrants into our city and having them contribute to our economy. That has led to the best and the brightest of the world's population to come to our shores and to contribute to scientific ingenuity and to other types of ingenuity. When we talk about immigrants' rights and when we talk about the contributions that immigrants make to our nation, we should also remember that the reason that the United States is an economic powerhouse has been because of the contributions that immigrants have made to this nation for centuries.
Immigrants in New York City today comprise more than a third of New York City's population. The immigrants in New York City today contribute to New York not only by making it dynamic culturally, but also by contributing economically to it as well. Immigrants here in New York City and in New York State come from all over. The discourse nationally obviously focuses a lot on Latino immigrants, specifically Mexican immigrants. However, here in New York, the face of immigration is multifaceted. We have Latinos coming from South America, Central America, and Mexico. We have immigrants coming from the Caribbean. We have immigrants coming from all over Europe and from different parts of Asia and Southeast Asia and Africa. The entire world is represented here in a microcosm in New York State.
Unfortunately, we also have a long history of going through periods when immigrants are not as welcomed or even shunned. And unfortunately, that's the period we're in right now. Most people know about what's been happening in Arizona, but few people know that, for example, under President Obama, deportations are through the roof. But it's not only happening on the federal level, but also states beyond Arizona are starting to adopt anti-immigrant policies. Here in New York, we've seen cities and towns in Long Island pass anti-immigrant ordinances, such as ordinances that target Latino day laborers. In upstate New York, a town recently passed an English-only law, which is not only unconstitutional, but is also dangerous because it prevents people with limited English proficiency from contacting government, such as even when they're trying to report a crime. Across New York State, we've seen school districts asking kids to prove their lawful immigration status when they try to register for school. This is despite the fact that close to 30 years ago, the Supreme Court said that undocumented children have the same rights as all other children to attend school. And up in the Rochester area, we've actually seen Customs and Border Protection officers board Amtrak trains and ask people, including American citizens, for their citizenship papers. So right now in New York, we have policies that are similar to Arizona, where you have to carry your papers with you at all times. Mayor Bloomberg just recently said that he supports a federal immigration enforcement program called Secure Communities. This is a program that has already led to the deportation of tens of thousands of immigrants, and is a program that requires that when anyone is arrested in any locality, including New York City, that the moment that they're arrested, and if they're fingerprinted, their fingerprints get sent to immigration authorities. And if immigration authorities have a reason to believe that that person may be undocumented or may be eligible for deportation because of the underlying crime, they're going to put an immigration hold on them and potentially deport them. The reality is, it is just a bad idea to have municipalities, whether it's New York City or Phoenix, Arizona, from getting involved in the immigration enforcement business. It hurts our communities, it tears apart families, and it makes our communities less safe because it drives undocumented immigrants and their family members underground, and they're less willing to report crimes to the police or to help in the prosecution of crimes.
There are many that take the position that in defending the United States or protecting the U.S., we should be very hard in keeping immigrants out, in closing off our borders. But that position ignores the fact that historically, we've always stood for the fact that we will welcome individuals here in the United States who are seeking a better life.
At the very least, we hope that whether in the next month or in the next term of Congress will at least pass the DREAM Act, which should really be a no-brainer, and both Republicans and Democrats support it. This is a bill that will create a path to citizenship for children who came here through no fault of their own as undocumented immigrants, but have graduated high school or gotten a GED and have either gone to college or served a couple of years in the military. It will provide them a path to citizenship. But we really hope that essentially common sense policies are going to take hold. We need to end the emphasis on enforcement only, because it doesn't work. We're not going to be able to deport 12 million undocumented immigrants who live in this country. So we need to talk about a path to legalization. And we need to ensure that any immigration policies that do pass protect our basic constitutional rights.
Our nation was founded by immigrants, thrives because of immigrants, and this is an important fact that cannot be omitted from today's immigration discussion.
There's still a long list of civil liberties and civil rights legislation that's long overdue in New York. It's an embarrassment that New York does not have marriage equality. The Reproductive Health Act, to update and put our reproductive rights laws where they belong, not in the criminal law, but in the public health law. While we were able to get the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights this past session, we didn't get the Farm Workers Bill of Rights. And that failure leaves farm workers extremely vulnerable to abuse and exploitation. Paid family leave which should have been a no-brainer. The bill was cleverly drafted to make benefits available out of the Workers' Comp Fund, which is the only government fund that is overflowing and that has a surplus. It would cost virtually nothing, nonpartisan redistricting. The legislature has to come up with a plan for redistricting. They're required to do that every 10 years. Governor Cuomo has made it a top priority to clean up Albany. Well, step one is nonpartisan redistricting. It's time to get rid of political gerrymandering. We shouldn't have just election districts that look like this in order to carve somebody out or to carve a particular viewpoint out. Our election districts should kind of look similar all over the state, and they should have similar numbers of people. So that's a huge challenge.
I'm with Hakeem Jeffries of the 57th District, Assembly District of New York City. Hakeem, you recently introduced legislation that was passed into law regarding the stop-and-frisk law. Can you tell us, basically, just give us an overview what stop-and-frisk is?
Well, stop-and-frisk is the practice of a police encounter on the streets, largely in New York City, where officers will temporarily detain, stop individuals who they suspect may be involved or should suspect may be involved in some type of criminal activity, may question them, may search them, and that may escalate ultimately into a summons being issued or an arrest being made.
Kristen, can you tell us about stop and frisk and what criteria the police have to use in order to be justified stopping someone?
Well, to stop somebody, they have to have reasonable suspicion that someone may be up to something unlawful. Doesn't have to be proof that they've committed a crime, not probable cause, but reasonable suspicion. That's for a stop and question. If they want to frisk somebody, they actually have to believe that the person may have a weapon. That is solely for an officer's safety. If they want to search somebody, it's even a higher standard. They have to suspect them of having something unlawful in their pockets. And then from there, of course, if they want to arrest somebody, which sometimes happens in stop and frisk, they actually have to have probable cause of a crime.
It's a tool that is used properly, is a legitimate law enforcement tool. Our concern is that it's often abused. And there's been a quota system that has been documented, in fact, in many police precincts, some of which are right here in central Brooklyn, the 81st and Bedford-Stuyvesant, where officers are essentially judged, have their performance judged based on the number of stop and frisk encounters that they engage in and document in a given day. It has a very corrosive effect on the relationship between the police and the community. And at the end of the day, if we all want the same things, which is greater public safety and greater public order, perhaps the best way to accomplish that is for there to be cooperation between the police and the community. And the stop and frisk practices, more than anything else, I think, undermines the confidence of an overwhelming majority of people in communities like those I represent in the ability of the police to be fair and to be equitable.
What we'd like to know if you've had any encounters with the police around here.
Plenty of times, sometimes I just be chilling with a group of friends, hanging out with a group of friends, and they'll stop us for no reason, maybe because they think we're maybe in a gang or we might have weapons or anything.
Have you been frisked?
Several times, like every time it's a routine, they say it's a routine stop, but it's most of the time, actually every time.
And has it happened recently?
I say a good 2 weeks ago.
Okay, so are you aware that after that happens to you, that up until a couple of months ago, they could put your name into a database even if they didn't arrest you? Did you know about that?
I have no idea.
How does it make you feel?
It makes me feel unsafe at the same time because I thought they was here to protect us, but at the end of the day, we have to look out for them as well. So it's kind of weird walking around, got to look both ways for the cops and for enemies.
There's still a lot of work to be done around stop and frisk. We feel strongly that there are lots of people who are being stopped illegally and indiscriminately. And we're going to keep fighting on that and keep pushing it until the police department goes back to a reasonable level of stop and frisk, where they're really focusing on people because of their unlawful activity as opposed to the color of their skin or how old they are or the neighborhood they're in, none of which should be a basis for stopping people.
Would you say that the constitutionality of stop and frisk is in question here?
Well, I don't think there's any question about it. We think that there are probably hundreds of thousands of unconstitutional and illegal stops. We see that both in terms of concerns about racial profiling, which would violate the Constitution, and in terms of just stops for which there's no legal basis, regardless of the race of the person stopped. It is quite clear to us that there are a huge number of illegal and unconstitutional stops, and we need to keep working on it, the public needs to working on it, the City Council needs to keep working on it until we get to a point where stop and frisk is a legal program, not a discriminatory and illegal program, which is what it is now.
Andrew Cuomo, as an advocate, as Attorney General, has taken some strong progressive positions. Before he became Attorney General, he was a strong advocate for the overhaul of the Rockefeller drug laws, and we worked with him a bunch on that. He's been a staunch opponent of the death penalty and an eloquent speaker on that subject as well. And as Attorney General, he regularly convened meetings with civil rights and civil liberties advocates. He's strongly pro-choice, but I think that the question will be, the extent to which he puts people in place in his administration who are deeply committed to these principles and to the principles of equality and justice, and the extent to which he's prepared to sort of take, principled positions that might not be so popular.